So the board members are here.
Great. Go ahead, Chuck. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for taking the time today. We're looking for a lot of information and a good, robust conversation around, mathematics here in the district and, what we've done to date, where we see progress and where's the work that still needs to be done. So I'll keep my introduction short and just turn it over to Dr. Smith.
Great. Can I share my screen, Kevin?
Let's find out. Yeah, go ahead. You're all set.
Okay, can you all see that?
Yep.
Good. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thanks for taking the time to be with us this morning. We're really excited to have this opportunity to have a discussion with you about our math program and some things we might do to better support our teachers and students in learning mathematics, or at least our students learning mathematics, our teachers and teachers. So let me see if I can get this to work. So we thought this morning it might be helpful, before we open it up to discussion, if we provided you guys with some kind of a brief but spectacular overview of where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going. And we're going to do that by taking a look at some data, both historical and current data, and then going through the process and recommendations that came out of the Math Curriculum Review Committee. And then that will naturally lead us into some discussions about the things that we've been working on, and as well as some things that we've currently implemented this year. And then we can also consider some additional things that we might want to do. So since we're going to be looking at data, I thought it would be helpful if we had kind of a shared understanding of what a comprehensive assessment system looks like, as well as how different types or levels of assessment kind of address the needs and the questions of different stakeholder groups. So if you look here, this is the Wilton Public Schools Comprehensive Assessment System. And you'll notice in the left-hand column, there's a list of the major or primary assessment instruments that we use in math. So, and they're grouped into what we would call levels or types of assessment. So what's important to keep in mind here is that different types of assessments help different stakeholder groups with certain questions and certain decisions. So you'll notice at the top left-hand, we have the statewide accountability assessments. And in math, we have the Smarter Balanced Assessment in grades 3 through 8, as well as the Connecticut Day SAT in grade 11. Those particular assessments answer the question, are enough of our students meeting standards? And the stakeholder group that most often makes that decision are state and district leaders and boards of education. The next level are what we call the periodic benchmark assessments, and that's at the program level. So we have, for instance, the numeracy screening in kindergarten, the MAP in grades kindergarten through 7th, as well as different forms of the PSAT in grades 8 through 11. That helps us to answer the question, which groups of students are meeting which standards? And it's primarily designed for use by principals, curriculum leaders, and SRBI teams. And then we get down to classroom-based assessments. And it's not possible for me to list all of the classroom-based assessments because there are a multitude of them. But some of the major include IXL diagnostics, which we implemented this year, as well as common unit and summative assessments, things like quizzes and rubrics, exit slips, math journals, and so on. Those types of assessments help teachers answer the question, what comes next in the learning for each individual student? And so what I think is important to take away from this chart is that different assessments serve different purposes, and that we need to be careful not to try to answer a particular question with an assessment that's not designed to answer that question. Let that sink in for a minute. This is why I was somewhat reluctant to share with anyone the IXL, the aggregate IXL data. And the reason is because the average pinpoint scores can be very misleading. In fact, when we had discussions with IXL about doing this, they advised us against it. And hopefully,
Chuck, I had a question about really before you, just so I understand. So is there one that trumps others? Like, are you looking at the statewide and it's like, if all the classroom assessments are not doing well, but the statewide accountability is doing well, does that trump? Or is they all just totally individual data information?
Andy, this is complex, but there is some relationship between these different assessments if you've got a well-aligned assessment system. So if there is a disconnect between the different levels of assessment, that might prompt us to take a look at something like curriculum or instruction or something like that. Let me finish what I'm saying, and then maybe we can dig a little.
Okay, sorry, got it.
That's okay.
Chuck, that would help us all. If you could just tell us when you want to take questions, okay? Because I think, we're all going to start. I mean, I have 3 already, so I don't want to do that. So tell us what is a logical place, for a break for questions, okay?
Sure. I think for this particular slide, it would be good if you waited until I finished talking about what I had to say about that slide, and then I can take some questions.
Oh, yeah. No, of course. Just let us know. That's what I'm asking. Thank you.
All right, so what I was saying was that the IXL data, we have to be careful about for what purpose we're using it. It's really designed to help teachers understand what's next in the learning for each individual student. It's not helpful in answering the question, are enough of our students meeting standard? Because it's not designed for that. And again, the average pinpoint scores can be misleading. And when we get into a little bit deeper dig into the IXL data later on in this presentation, I think it'll become clear to you why it can be a misleading metric. The other thing that's really important to keep in mind is that there's a difference between norm referenced assessments and criterion referenced assessments, which I discussed when we presented the IXL data. So, I don't want to get too psychometry on you, but a norm reference test allows us to make comparisons, all different types of comparisons. We can compare an individual student to another individual student, groups of students to other groups of students. We can compare prior performance to current performance. Criterion referenced assessments, which is what IXL is, by the very nature of it, does not allow us to make comparisons across students or groups of students, or to compare prior performance to future or prior performance to current performance. So maybe I could give you a little bit of an anecdote about why this can be problematic. So I meet monthly with the interventionists, and I had my October meeting in which we discussed a whole host of different issues. But one of the things that they all brought up to me was that they were noticing something about the average pinpoint scores. They were noticing from the first administration to the second administration for certain students, the pinpoint score changed drastically in a short period of time. And in discussing it with some of the teachers, they were noticing that the teachers who were very conscientious about having the kids keep up their pinpoint scores, about providing small group instruction and assigning IXL practice, that some of their students shifted their pinpoint scores drastically. There were some other students with the same teacher who were not showing such a drastic change. So I think you could see where that would help us to understand what it is we're measuring here, right? For some of the kids, we might have been measuring a simple summer slide, or more importantly, the COVID slide. And with a little bit of extra help, we're able to get them back on track. But there are other students that, this data has indicated that they may have more pervasive issues. So I think we just need to be careful what we are thinking we're measuring the impact of, right? So we gave this in September and October. We need to be careful. Are we measuring where kids are globally, or are we measuring the impact of summer slide, COVID slide, whatever? It's kind of the nature of this particular assessment system. Measuring kids' learning is very complex and in some respects is very primitive right now. So we have to do things like looking at triangulating data, about looking at trends over time. Because the fact of the matter is there's lots of things that impact student learning. It can be things like the curriculum. It can be the quality of instruction. It can be things such as summer slide. It can be things such as COVID slide. So I think this is just a long-winded way of saying we need to be very cautious about how we interpret data and what conclusions we draw from it. And that we need time to look at trends, look at triangulating data before we can start to hone in on what the issue actually is. Okay, so I'm going to stop for a minute because I've been doing a lot of talking and I just want to kind of check in to see if you're following along with me here.
So I have just two or three questions, just so I can understand a little bit.
Sure.
Is there the assessments? I'm just trying to kind of wrap my head around the difference between kind of figuring out whether a student has mastered the skill or just kind of has an understanding of the skill, and then when they can move on, or when it's kind of needs, you know, some more reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
And then I know that you talked about kind of what measures what. So I would just, at some point, if we can talk about where we are in the process of evaluating students and kind of what percentage have we kind of figured out. Is it kind of summer and COVID slide? Is there a bigger need? And kind of where we are in addressing those, and whether, you know, small groups and individual practice, if that's kind of been rolled out, you know, universally, or just, you know, where we are in kind of making those determinations. I know that's beyond the slide, but that kind of triggered in me.
Okay, Ruth, that was a lot. I think for, you know, this is very individualized, you know, in sorting through what's going on with an individual child. Again, we need to look at the child over time and look at trends and to try to triangulate data. It's also important to keep in mind that teaching and learning is very dynamic, right? Kids are constantly learning, they're constantly changing. And again, all of these factors can impinge where they are at a particular time. That said, I think as we go through the presentation, it'll give you a sense, or at least I hope it'll make visible for you what our thinking is around all of the issues that you brought up.
I guess just more, is it, but the assessments itself, some pinch on kind of mastery and some kind of measure understanding. Is that a fair way to look at it?
I think what I'm struggling with, Ruth, is that you seem to think there's a difference between mastery and understanding. Maybe you could talk to me a little bit more about what you're meaning by that.
So I think that, like, what, to some extent, like things like kind of like math facts, let's say, kind of like understanding how you do addition and subtraction versus like having it mastered at your fingertips. You know, so when you like move on to the next skill, you're kind of not losing the skill behind it that maybe you need a couple months later. Do you know, I guess that's kind of where, as an example. So that's just, you know, being able to demonstrate that you know how to do it versus being able to like really have it kind of under your belt.
Right. So let me reflect back what I think you're saying. So I think what you're doing is you're making a distinction between deep understanding and skill, right? So you talk about the skill of math facts,
Right.
versus the understanding of something like number sense, right?
Correct.
So my answer to that would be that, again, we need to have multiple data points to make any conclusions about a particular student's performance, right? So I wouldn't give it a math facts test and based solely upon that test conclude that they've mastered their math facts. We'd want to see what they're doing over time on multiple assessments to conclude that they've mastered that particular skill. And probably also see whether they can apply it in a more of a problem-solving way. Deeper understanding takes even more time, right? Because we're talking about deep understanding of big concepts. And again, one assessment is never going to give us the true, because there's a lot of error in all assessments. And, again, I'm getting very psychometric-y here, but any assessment by its very nature samples students' performance and then makes some conclusions about their overall performance based upon that small sample. And that introduces what's known as measurement error. The good thing about measurement error is that it cancels over time. So that when you look at trends and you triangulate data and look at multiple assessments, again, that allows us to kind of hone in on what's known as the true score for a particular student. No one assessment is going to give us that answer. Does that make sense?
No, it does. I just wanted to understand that like we have tools and assessments in place that kind of can track both, that are looking at both.
That's really the purpose of a comprehensive assessment system. The periodic benchmark assessments, that gives us trends over time. If you ever go on to your child's MAP score, you can pull up what's known as a rainbow graph. And you can see every MAP score that they've gotten during their time here in Wilton and track their progress over time in relation to benchmarks, right? That gives you a much better sense of where your students' skill levels are and understanding is, rather than just one assessment.
So I have a quick question. I know that we initially, I think, got this meeting finally together because of IXL, but I was under the impression that based on all of these assessments, our math program is still struggling a little bit. And it seems that our kids are testing a little bit lower than some of the other DERG areas. And I thought that was sort of why we were coming together. So it wasn't the focus on IXL, but in fact, the combination of all of the assessments. Is that not, am I misunderstanding?
No, you're right. So when we reviewed the testing results more than a year ago and conducted the math review, we did come to some conclusions, and we're going to go over those again with you guys today and give you a status report on where we stand with those. I think we can also make some suggestions for some things that we can do a little differently this year that may help as well.
Okay, thanks.
Chuck, I just had one question, which is on your chart talking about the stakeholders.
Yes.
Maybe I can't see it all because of the Zoom screens, but just wondering, for instance, as a Board of Ed, you're right, we're going to be concerned about the state measures, but we're not listed under benchmarks. And especially if the question is which groups of students are meeting which standards, while we don't need all the nitty-gritty details, we may need some of that. And then as a system, to what extent do the teachers understand the sort of the bigger picture? So, they've got the kids in their classroom, which is great. And as a board member, I don't need to know their quiz grades at all. But teachers may need to understand how we as a district are doing and feeding into each subsequent either grade level or school.
Absolutely.
So I'm just wondering, I don't think you mean it to be so discrete.
That's what
I'm just thinking if the teachers don't understand our sort of overall program challenges, then we may not be able to get as far as we want.
Right. So that's why I use the term primary. It doesn't mean that the stakeholders don't have access to or see that data. It's just, what is the primary decisions made by the different stakeholder groups and which data help you to make that particular decision. And so, for instance, our teachers do look at the SBA and interim benchmark assessments. What those help teachers to do is to hone in on what they need to do with their classroom-based assessments. And again, this goes back to a sampling issue. If the benchmark assessments indicate a particular strand, say fractions, that a particular group of kids are having difficulty with, that's not going to help the teacher decide what's next in the learning for each individual student. They need to then take their assessments, their classroom-based assessments around fractions, and dig a little bit deeper. So again, it's not that SBAC or the map is not helpful to teachers. It is, but it's primarily helpful in getting them to use their classroom assessments to dig a little bit deeper for each individual student. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thanks.
Vandy, did you have any additional questions?
No, I'm still trying to understand the definition of triangulate.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's not you, Chuck. It's just a very complicated, I think my question is along the same lines of Gretchen's. So we have all these different tests and standards. When you combine them all, if you just take out, I know what you're saying about the IXL, but in a really simple question, how are we doing in math when you combine them all?
All right, so that's what I think we'll be answering as we go through the data.
All right, perfect.
And it is complex. And what I meant by triangulation is that we look at different data points to make a decision about students. So, I can give you an example. When we have our data meetings, whenever the benchmark assessments come out, I go to each school and we look at each and every student, right? But I don't look at just the MAP scores. I look at MAP scores over time. I look at their other benchmark assessments, such as the running records. We now have just implemented things like the Dibbles and the Hegarty. So we look across all of that data and we talk to the classroom teacher about what their classroom assessments are showing. Before we make any decisions, for instance, who needs intervention, I would never put a kid in intervention based upon a single MAP score. I would look at MAP across time. I would look at other benchmark assessments. I'd look at the SBA. So that's what triangulation means, is that we're just looking at multiple data points in order to make decisions about kids. Does that help?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Trudy. And I hope that through this presentation, again, that we're going to make our thinking visible about what the results are, what they mean, and why we're recommending the things that we're recommending.
Great.
So, Trudy.
Good morning. Can you advance the slides, Chuck, please? There, you can stop there. In reviewing where we've been, kind of the first step in framing out what our next steps will be, it's an important process. The following slides that we're going to look at summarize 5 years of SBA data, and we also review the process and conclusions from the mathematics curriculum review. First and foremost, when we look at that 5-year data, there are clear takeaways from those test scores. Most importantly, our students are growing. Our curriculum is much more aligned to standards, and our instructional practices continue to improve. Much of this work was led and guided by our mathematics instructional coaches. In the process, however, we have identified areas of growth. Opportunities for growth exist within some cohorts, with our struggling students, and in the area of operations and algebraic thinking standards. The math achievement data continues to guide both our short-term and our long-term steps. So this is a big chart with a lot on it. It shows on the face of it 5 years of smarter balance data, both across cohort and within cohorts. Cohort data is shown horizontally year to year. Cross-cohort data, is shown horizontally year to year, and rough cohort data is shown diagonally. And we've highlighted some of the years so you can follow them through as students progress from grade to grade. Since 2015, math achievement has improved in nearly every grade across cohort and within cohorts. The average annual change in the percentage of students meeting benchmark demonstrates growing achievement levels. This gradual growth in student achievement reflects our commitment to curriculum alignment to standards and best instructional practices. The work of the Math Curriculum Review Committee identified further refinements to curriculum instruction. So we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into the SBA data in order to better understand those areas of growth and opportunity. Go ahead, Matt.
So the chart that you're seeing here is part of our, in a normal year, our yearly assessment presentation to the Board of Ed. And what you'll notice is it gives a little bit more detail compared to the chart that Trudy just presented, and that it breaks it down into the different levels. The benchmark starts at level 3. So what you're hoping for and what you see here, and grade 4 is an example, but certainly not the only example. This is nearly every grade has this progression over time, is smaller numbers of students in level 1 and level 2, and more students in level 3 and level 4. This is a very typical grade. I just picked one grade, but this is really pretty common for each of our grade levels, with some notable exceptions, which we'll talk about. If you move on to the next slide, you'll see a real kind of a highlight here. The 7th grade is our most promising data. The pattern, again, is the same as we've seen, but there's more dramatic shifts above the benchmark, in particular in level 4. This data shows the impact of curriculum alignment to the Common Core standards, the sustained coaching efforts, even sustained coaching at each building, because this is the end result after numbers of years, and also the support that coaches give to our change in instructional practices. The next slide is going to show you an area of growth and opportunity, and Trudy will talk to you about this a little bit.
Thank you. I almost forgot to unmute. The grade 8 data over time really shows flat growth. It's important to kind of put this in context and understand how learning and content moves and develops within the Common Core. The demands of the Common Core standards in grade 8 increased substantially from grade 7. Across the state and within DIRG A, growth from 7th to 8th grade typically doesn't match the growth in other grades. Our students have probably shown some less growth 7th to 8th grade than some of our DIRG A counterparts. There is a compound effect of an insufficient instructional time that can contribute to this flat growth. In addition, we can identify some instructional practices that have been utilized successfully in grade 6 and 7 that can be incorporated into grade 8. An example of that is the use of weekly reviews. The use of weekly reviews tends to keep student learning fresh. 6th and 7th grade are also highly aligned and do planning together more routinely, and they utilize common assessments and materials more consistently. Our goal is to support the 8th grade team, and we'll prioritize piloting some of the illustrative math curriculum units that are highly aligned with the Common Core standards and also ensure consistent materials. We work closely with the coach to support the team to implement routine use of weekly reviews and formative assessment. And we'll rely on the building administrative team to check in just to ensure that that team has all the support they need to make some of these instructional shifts. Go ahead, Matt.
So another thing that's sort of important to think about when we're looking at this data is that there is growth, even though that grade 8 data was showing, pretty stagnant, ending the year at about 67% of our students meeting the benchmark. When they get to grade 11, we're hitting about 75 to 76% meeting the benchmark. So there's some pretty significant growth that goes on. Where we have not really seen the shift is that we haven't been able to increase that 75 or 76% meeting the benchmark in grade 11. So they grow significantly from 8 to 11, but we have seen a kind of a inability to change that trajectory beyond the 76%. High school teachers report a wide variability in math skills among incoming freshmen, and we've heard that for a couple of years now. Chuck's going to talk about another area of growth, and that is in the area of struggling learners.
Okay, so this is a comparison of our students with and without disabilities. As you can see, our students with disabilities are struggling. Although you'll notice again in 7th grade, that particular group, given their instructional practices, seems to be able to be closing the gap a little bit more. And I would attribute it to the things that Trudy already enumerated that are happening in the other grade levels. Some of the things that we're trying to do in order to close this gap, in addition to bolstering what goes on in general ed, is we're trying to work with our special ed colleagues to make sure that the IEP goals and objectives are aligned to the Common Core curriculum, and that's ongoing work. One of the things that we discovered a number of years ago is that when students with special needs are put into self-contained math classes, the achievement gap widens. So over time, we are working with Middlebrook to make sure that we are decreasing the number of students who are put into self-contained classrooms. Another thing that we've been doing is that we put into place what I think is a pretty innovative model for our what's known as Algebra 1-1 class at the high school. So we level classes in math. Level 1 is the lowest level. And what we've done with that particular group is that we're providing them with extra instruction. So we have a block schedule. So they get their regular, 85 minutes of instruction from their primary instructor. In that classroom, we have a co-teacher. And then they are provided with an additional 45 minutes, during a cycle of targeted intervention support from our academic math interventionists. We actually had a meeting with that group yesterday to see how that's been going. And in some respects, it's going well. There are some thoughts about how to maybe change that. And we'll be bringing that to the Teaching and Learning Committee shortly. And then I would assume shortly after that to the board to discuss how we're doing with that and maybe some refinements to that program that we'd like to suggest. Okay, who's next?
Another important thing to think about struggling learners is how we support them. The SBA program has a growth model, and the growth model is really based on if you make a certain target improvement in your scale score over time, you will move from level 1 to level 2, from level 2 to level 3. What we're finding is, based on that data, some real promising improvements when you look at our intervention students, and we're also including that AIM program in that at Middlebrook, that those kids are showing growth and higher growth than the typical students. There were some outliers. There was a year where 7th and 8th grade did not grow at that level in math, but that was also a year where our math interventionist was pulled out and was doing a long-term sub position. And so if we look by and large, the intervention program has really been tremendously successful in growing our students. Back to that triangulating data, if we look at the growth model for the MAP program, we have some really stellar growth in math from the students who receive intervention. Carol Maxwell is our interventionist at Miller Driscoll, and her growth percentage is the 80th percentile level. That means she's at the top of growing of all students. So real encouraging for our intervention program and our AIM program. Another piece that we want to talk about is in an opportunity for growth is in one specific strand. If you think about the 8th grade and the high school and some of the challenges we're having really stem from our ability to score. You know, the CT-SAT is essentially a test of algebra and algebra 2. And how well we get kids to understand algebraic concepts builds over time. And one of the things we noticed is a discrepancy between a student's overall RIT score and their RIT score for operations and algebraic thinking. Student proficiency in the operations and algebraic thinking standards provide the foundation for later math courses, and it's best achieved using a guided discovery program for learning math. So we're wondering if the gaps in these earlier grades in operations algebraic thinking and the challenge of teaching math using this inquiry-based instructional model, coupled with that instructional time at Middlebrook, are impacting students' performance as they go up. So we're one of our wonderings is those impacts we're seeing in later grades. Perhaps some of that is starting as a conceptual foundational situation earlier on than we originally thought.
This chart is really important because it comes from Achieve the Core, and it really delineates the connection between those operations and algebraic thinking standards and ultimately readiness for algebra. That's not to diminish number sense place value, but these are the foundations for algebra and higher learning. And when we talk about operations and algebraic thinking, that's not to say we're doing variables in math in 1st and 2nd grade. Where that foundation comes from is through K2 addition and subtraction fluency, 3-5 multiplication and division fluency, an introduction to order of operations, and then that work builds into that first introduction into abstract expressions. We call it expressions and equations, and that further builds the foundation for algebra.
Hey, Trudy, I think it would be important to help all of us understand how to teach operations in algebraic thinking. Because when you say things like fact fluency, I think
Right.
it's memorization.
I know.
We're finding that that's probably not the best way to develop fluency because it doesn't develop the underlying conceptual understanding that's underpinning fluency.
It doesn't at all. I know most of us probably learned or tried to learn math facts by memorization. And that really doesn't hold up for students. In fact, memorization really doesn't give students the understanding that they need to move forward. And if their math learning relies solely on memorization, there's no meaning for students, and it starts to break down at exactly the point where students are asked to engage in higher levels of conceptual thinking. An example is when we teach multiplication facts, we've learned that the best way to do it is to introduce our foundation facts first, 0, 1, 2s, 5s, and 10s. By learning those math facts, students can then use those foundation facts to build their understanding of other math facts. For example, 7, well, 7 is a 5 and a 2. And if I know my 5s and I know my 2s, I can use that to answer or to learn and to know a 7 math fact. And it's really important. And there's many ways to help students develop that learning. And I'm trying to be really explicit about my words. And, you know, later if we have questions about that, I would invite Randy Rondano to share with you some of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, the kinds of practices that we offer students to really solidify that conceptual understanding.
And I think, Trudy, the important thing here to understand is that we have an approach to math that involves exploration and inquiry. And that is the best way to develop that underlying conceptual understanding. And that's where I think our teachers are struggling,
Right.
is making sure that we're true to that inquiry and exploration approach so that we are developing true algebraic thinking.
Sorry, I mean, we often talk about it as the concrete pictorial abstract progression of learning. And first, students have to understand it and work with it concretely. They have to picture it or represent it, and then they can achieve that abstract level of learning. It's the research-based foundation for all the Singapore math programs. Singapore math, as you know, is not a math program. It's a philosophy and approach to children's learning mathematics.
Okay, let's move on.
So just to kind of sum up our historical data, what we've seen and we've presented to the board in the past, a steady incremental growth over time in grades K through 7. We still have demonstrated a need to improve our ability to reach struggling learners and our need to end our stagnant performance in grades 8 and 11. We can leverage the success we've had with coaching and curriculum alignment to improve specific domains. We've certainly highlighted algebraic thinking, and that will support achievement as students move up through the grades. And just so you know, that we also have a kind of an incomplete picture. We have a whole year with no summative data. So, you know, we're going to find more about gaps and things as we move along through the year. But I think we can leverage that success with coaching and our intervention program, because we've demonstrated, we've seen the data, we've seen how it works. And I have every confidence that as we move through the year, we're going to, kids will be progressing.
Can I just ask a question? Could you go back to the slide, Matt, of the that SBAC data for 5 years? I think it was, it's a while back. It might have been slide 9.
11.
I think
The
it was
first
9.
one, that one.
Yep.
There you go. Okay, maybe that's it. You know, I think you're right over 5 years. I think what's given the board a little pause, though, is if you go back 3 years, grade 5 and 6 look a little, I mean, sorry, grade 5 looks a little wobbly.
Yeah, we've had some, and again, I hesitate to think about one point of data or one year. That's
Okay.
why if we looked at grade 5 over time, the general trend has been that same level of movement away from the level 1s. That's a year where they had some fluctuation. But I'm not sure it's grade 5. Sometimes you have to look back at grade 3 and 4 and think about what the building blocks and the curriculum alignment. And sometimes curriculum alignment takes a little while till you see it at the end result.
I would also add that we have to be cognizant of variability of cohorts. Some groups of students perform differently than other groups of students. And that's why we put the diagonals in so that you can see the progression from one year to the next among relatively like groups of students. Granted, obviously there's in-migration and out-migration from grade to grade, but for the most part, that group of students is relatively similar.
You know, I also think it's really important to put this in context and why we look at both within cohort and across cohort. If you look at that 65.9% in 5th grade in 2019, correct me if I'm wrong, Matthew, but I think almost 18% of those kids receive special ed supports and services.
So
That's a
that-
very high number of students in a particular cohort. It's also important to keep in mind, as Trudy mentioned before, not all curricula are equal across grade levels. Fifth grade can be a little bit of a lift. So when you have 18% of your kids in special ed and you start a year that has a more rigorous curriculum, you would expect that that group's going to struggle a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, no, it makes sense. It's, I'm just trying to, sort of pinpoint, sort of what I'm noticing in the numbers, which, is a little superficial right now because it's the first time I've seen this slide in a while. I know it was in last year's report. Okay, and then obviously the grade 8 scores, are certainly back up everything that you're saying about kind of flat.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And at some point, maybe you'll get to it later, but just a reminder of where the DERG stands, in terms of either growth scores or the final score. We don't need that. We don't need that right now, but just, again, it's one thing to know that our kids are progressing. But if we look out at other districts and see perhaps stronger performance, we also want to know the reasons behind that.
Yeah, we'll try to address that later.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Can I just ask a quick question? Because we just talked about struggling students. So is there kind of like a definition of struggling that I can just pivot around? Is it kind of the level 2 to level 3? Is it that kind of area?
I think when we refer to struggling students, we are referring to what are known as high needs students. And that's generally students who are in special education, students who receive English as a second language services, as well as our students who are on free and reduced lunch. Am I correct, Matthew?
Yes, and if we want to speak broadly, we also think about students who are not meeting the benchmark on the map. That's another level, those are another level of struggling, but the high needs is a definition at the state level that we're identifying it in our data, our typical data presentation to the board.
And certainly, given our numbers, the biggest group in the high needs are students with disabilities.
Correct.
Okay. Much of the data that you just saw was data that was reviewed by the Math Curriculum Review Steering Committee. We also included survey data from stakeholders. We studied best practices in math instruction and national trends. Before we take a look at some of those recommendations, I wanted to sort of go over exactly what the curriculum committee did and how we kind of came to our conclusions. Again, we looked at the achievement data and we studied carefully stakeholder responses from teachers, students, and parents. And we came out with recommendations in 4 areas: curriculum alignment, course sequence, instructional support, and instructional time. If we can advance to the next slide, we wanted to provide you with a glimpse of what we saw in our survey data when we did the curriculum review. And what the slide does is summarize the feedback that we received from each of the stakeholder groups, along with an indication of the response rates from each of the groups. Teachers were at about 50%, and they noted concerns about instructional time. At the time, there were continued misconceptions about the lesson framework, and teachers also expressed concern about the pace of the curriculum, and teachers had a very strong concern about the number of students who override into classes they're not necessarily prepared for. We had a 60% response rate from the students, which included 4th and 5th grade at Cider Mill all the way through the high school. Resoundingly, students expressed support for their teachers. They enjoy being challenged and being in a problem-solving environment. They enjoy collaborating with their peers. And some students found the work too easy, others found the work too difficult. Now, parents, there's not a response rate, but we did have responses from 464 parents. Again, parents expressed strong support for schools and teachers. They do have some misconceptions around our instructional model and how it benefits students. And some parents expressed that the needs of their children weren't being met as well as they could be. And parents asked for better communications at all levels. Now, the takeaways for the steering committee was that at the time, our curriculum could do a better job of meeting the needs of all students. Instructional time has had an impact on our ability to accomplish our curriculum objectives. Our curriculum needed to be better articulated to ensure that teachers can implement it around the priority standards in their classrooms. And we have a need to provide more information and explain what we're doing better to parents. So go ahead. Here is a summary of our recommendations. There is a link at the top to the longer report that we did at the time, but I'm going to summarize them. What we've done, what's in process, and what hasn't been done. The adoption of, well, the new curriculum units, the rewriting, resequencing, reworking is well underway and is nearly complete. We adopted a new math course sequence beginning in the fall of 2019, and that involved going to 1 6th grade math class and 2 7th grade, although this year is the first year of the 2 7th grade, and each of the other changes will be rolled in as we progress over time. And that progression is on schedule. We have only a few more curriculum units to be rewritten at the K-5 level. We have some delays. That work was targeted for summer 2020, but because of our need to plan for our pandemic learning models and return to school, that additional work was put on hold. The 6-8 teachers are piloting specific curriculum units from illustrative math, which is well aligned to standards. Some decisions about resource allocation precluded additional coaches and interventionists at the K-5 level. And discussions about how best to accomplish additional math time at Middlebrook have not yet resulted in a new schedule.
Just realized I was muted, sorry. There's a question about, is there any indication about the 6th grade math course, which was new last year, part of that new sequence, has it impacted math performance? The data I'm showing you here, especially the fall 2020, is preliminary. Toby would probably be not happy that I'm sharing it because they still have some makeups to do. But I wanted to share it because it's showing some encouraging news here. What you see is that our current 7th grade students are 5% more of them are above the benchmark at this point in the year as they compared to where they were in 6th grade. So, given everything that's gone on with the pandemic, with kind of interrupted, even not having a full complete year of that new 6th grade, I think it's pretty encouraging to see that they're starting off the year right now in a better place as a group. We'll probably have a little bit more data. It's still trickling in. I know Toby's working through getting the makeups done, but I felt it was worth sharing this because I thought it was pretty encouraging news.
Hey, Matt, it's Mandy Schmauk. Is this just for grade 7? Is this like a highlight through the district for just grade 7? Do we have this for anyone else? Or is this the specific grade that we're tracking?
Well, I showed this only because the question was asked about how the grade 6 course do last year. We're still incomplete, and Cider Mill given the impact of quarantining really hasn't really begun their testing. I think Miller Driscoll is pretty close to doing that, but we haven't shut the testing windows. There's still a lot of work to be done there. We're actually administering the NWEA MAP test remotely for the first time, so there's some challenges timing wise to getting that, especially at Miller Driscoll. You need some parental support to get those kiddos to complete the test at home. So we're still working through a lot of that. So
Got it. And about what we're looking, the fall 2019 to the fall 2020, if you look in the orange, the count, why was that significant change that we had lost so many in that low average count? I'm just out of curiosity so I can understand how to read this. So we went from 30.
So
if you look at the orange.
I would focus on the percentiles, not the raw numbers.
Okay.
Because in Middlebrook, like every other grade, we have a number of students who withdrew to homeschooling or
got it. Yep, that
school.
makes sense. No, I just didn't know if there was something I was missing, like where they went. Got it.
And I think we still have about 37 students who have not completed their testing yet. So
Okay.
like I said, it's a preliminary, but I thought it was worth sharing just because it seems encouraging, and it's still a pretty good, 250 some odd students. So it's a good sample size. It's not 20 students. So I thought it was worth sharing, and I thought it did present some encouraging news for that new sixth grade course.
Yeah, no, it's great. And do you guys ever, and I don't want to throw an apple in the wheelhouse or whatever the saying is, but do you guys ever keep track of which of these students are getting outside tutoring?
No, but we can talk about that a little later. That was something I was going to bring up.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for showing this data, because we did want, since the board approved the new updated grade 6 math course and program, just wanted to know if there was any sort of feedback. So this is, or data. So this is the preliminary results, which are somewhat positive. So I think that's great news. So thanks for digging that out, even though I know it's not final. That's seems like a good sign.
Trudy, did you want to share how the teachers are feeling about the new?
Yeah, I can give you some anecdotal feedback from the teachers, and their feedback was incredibly positive. They are so behind this move. They really feel like students are being given the opportunity to really solidify their understandings. They felt very much able, especially after the first few months, to address the diversity of needs, from the students who need a little extra support to the students who needed the extra challenge. They're going into this year feeling really confident with the sixth grade curriculum.
Okay. Well, I was worried. I think we all had the question about, would going to one grade 6, stronger course hinder or hold back any of our high flyers? What I think that's a shorthand, for our more talented math kids. Am I correct in looking at this, that we have a slightly larger percentage in the higher performance band?
Yeah, 36 in the compared to 31, but it's right now about the same number of students.
Okay, got it.
But it certainly hasn't held them back. There's no indication that that's decreased.
Right. I think that's something just then to watch. Have you heard any feedback from parents or students? I feel overwhelmed, or I don't feel challenged enough, or I feel just right. I don't know if you've had time to do that, or teachers have been getting some feedback from families or kids.
I don't know that teachers have specifically have sought that kind of feedback specifically from students, right?
Yeah.
I think I was in a number of the sixth grade classes last year, and anecdotally, it sure looked like it was working. I was going to bring this up in the next slide, but to address your point about concerns about high flyers, or even not being able to say, are we providing that opportunity to take Algebra 1 in middle school at the same level as we had in the past? And I was very, I was trained on that data as we were going through the placement process. So the students who moved from 6th grade math to pre-algebra 7, which will be the group who takes Algebra 1 in middle school, represents 42% of that class.
Chuck, you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, we can do it. It's not in there, but why that's important, when you go back and you look at the percentage of students who have taken Algebra 1 in middle school, that percentage has ranged from 39 to 50%. So we are squarely in that range. And I don't feel that we're creating a situation where students are missing the opportunity to take Algebra 1 in middle school. I think we're right about where we need to be. And I would, rather than seeing fewer students take algebra in middle school, I would expect to see that percentage increase as we solidify the foundation that students need for algebra.
Trudy, I think you lost me there. It's Mandy. I thought there was no longer an option for students to take Algebra 1 in middle school.
No, I didn't include it in this. That's not true. What we've done is after next year, we will no longer offer geometry in middle school. Students still have the opportunity to take Algebra 1 in middle school. The progressions are 1 6th grade math. In 7th grade, you have 7th grade math and a compressed 7th, 8th grade math, which is pre-algebra. The students in that compressed pre-algebra course would be the ones to take Algebra 1 in 8th grade.
Got it. But so the students in 7th grade right now, there is no compressed 7th, 8th grade course currently.
Yes, there is.
Oh, there is. Got it.
Yes.
Okay.
What we don't have, which is what we moved away from, was the super compressed 6th grade course, which really required kids to take 3 years of math in one in order to do Algebra 1 in 7th grade. Great. That was the information, one of the pieces of information I was going to share on this slide, but this is just a quick recap of what we've done, the recommendations that have been implemented and are in process. Again, our curriculum units are almost fully aligned at this stage. And that really, the benefit of that has really allowed teachers to address those priority standards last year. That was, a stroke of good planning. I'm not going to say luck, good planning, that we reoriented things. And for most of our students in Miller Driscoll and Cider Mill, we were really able to hit the priority standards before we moved into a remote learning situation. We're piloting and exploring the 6-8 illustrative math curriculum, which is a problem-based curriculum for Middlebrook. All 3 grade levels have incorporated some of the units. We'd like to be in a position to take a decision about full implementation for next year, but doing so, we would really need to address the instructional time issue at Middlebrook. The course sequence and placement process is on track. 6th grade last year, the 2 new 7th grade courses this year. Next year will be the 8th grade pre-algebra and Algebra 1. We're beginning the planning stages to roll in the high school courses. We'd like to be in a position to offer a pilot of the Algebra 1 geometry course for grade 9 students in 2021. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done around that.
Trudy, can I ask you a question before we jump on again?
Sure.
Before we move on. Debbie had brought up that we've been talking about the high flyers. Just a quick question about that. How are we identifying our high flyers and making sure that we are finding a way to challenge them? I feel like typically most kids are not going to ask for more work and they're not going to ask to be challenged more. Are teachers trying to identify those kids and push them ahead within that class? Or are we kind of letting everything ride out?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a good question. I don't know that I would characterize it as pushing them ahead. I would characterize it as finding opportunities to go much deeper. If we had more
That's fine.
time, and interestingly, that's one of the things that the 6th grade teachers shared with me yesterday when I chatted with them, was that they felt almost freed to be able to do more of that just in time when students needed it. The curriculum that they tested out and piloted offers within every unit something called Are You Ready for More, which is really targeted for the students who click, for whom the learning clicks more readily, and they're ready to go deeper and try something, I hate to use the word harder, but more challenging. So the other thing that's really, really important to remember is that there are very few students who are quote unquote high flyers across the board. Often students excel in some things and not so much in others. So it's really important to be able to pace that and offer just the right things at the right time for students. And that's where we get back into the discussion about assessments and more classroom assessments. I don't mean tests, but being able to check in and monitor where students are and being able to offer that challenge and the work that's just right at the right time.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page and trying to push our kids to the next level. Like having them meet standards shouldn't be a good enough place for us all to be happy about, right? Like I find so often, oh, our kids met standards. Well, great. Well, why aren't we doing anything else to kind of get them to that next level, as opposed to waiting until the next grade?
Yeah, I'm not sure I would agree with that characterization. When you study the Common Core standards, there's an enormous amount of challenge within each of them and with each area and levels. So meeting standards is a really good thing, and meeting standards can represent different levels of work for different students. There's no, I really struggle with painting kind of that stark a picture. Meeting standards, the next step isn't necessarily the next year's work. The next step is going deeper into that work and making sure students can really understand it. I don't think students necessarily need to start solving equations with variables, because I could provide students with some mind-numbing, incredibly crazy, challenging experiences just around fractions, ratio, and proportions, and applications of those concepts. So I think it's really important to keep our eyes on the depth of learning within each standard rather than rush to the next grade.
I think you and I are talking about the same thing. I think
Okay.
depth and next level are the same. I just want to make sure that we're not becoming too complacent and letting our kids just sit where they are.
So maybe I could jump in here a little bit, and I think we were going to try to address this a little bit later in the presentation, but going to your question, Jen, about how do we identify, our assessments do identify who our high flyers are. What's important to note with students is whether they're growing or not, right? And we
Okay.
do have some data to indicate that our high flyers are growing probably at a greater rate than our students who are struggling. So, you know, I also wanted to share with you, a number of years ago, we had the person who originated Singapore math. He's a
Right.
world-known expert. His name is Ban Har.
Mm-hmm.
And he shared with us in Singapore, where they have the highest math achievement in the world, they don't accelerate kids ever, ever. What they do is that they enrich and deepen their understanding of grade level of things, because in the long run, that will serve students better in dealing with the higher math later on, if that makes any sense. That was a new learning.
It does. I think you and I, again, I think we're saying the same thing, just in a different way. Deeper level, or I just want them to be challenged. It says,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily mean moving them to the next level, but, you know, doing deeper work, whatever you guys want to call it. I just want to make sure that that's what's happening in all of our classes, because that's not what, as a parent in this community, that's not what I hear. So that's just the only reason I'm asking the question. But we don't need to take up more time. Thanks.
Okay. Are you ready for the next slide, Trudy?
Yes, please. Okay, we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about areas of recommendation that we've addressed or addressed in part. And that's why we're going to take a little bit of time to go through these. We also need to recognize, with respect to instructional time, that pandemic learning models reduces instructional time in all areas. Even if we're 100% in school, there's impediments and practices that impede the way school normally looks. In a typical year, without adequate protected instructional time, the full impact of the curriculum review committee's recommendations would be difficult to realize. So we're going to take a look at specifically at the elementary level first. K-5 students experience nearly twice as much instructional time in English language arts as they do in math. And clearly literacy is essential to student academic success in all areas, including math. So as a result, we need to just prioritize schedules so that we provide for and protect 1 hour of math instructional time in grades 1 through 5. Buildings, as they do now, need to continue to support math as a scheduled priority and ensure that scheduled math time isn't accidentally or reduced by things like an extra recess or snack time, and that when those events occur, that they're more evenly dispersed throughout the different content areas. So we don't always do snack time in math and things like that. At Middlebrook, the math instructional time, quite frankly, needs to increase. When you look at, currently we have an average of 30 to 35 minutes of daily math instruction. Partly, that's the schedule that was put into place in response to the pandemic learning model. But we did an analysis in the curriculum review where we took the 42-minute scheduled time and looked at the number of special schedules and other events that reduced instructional time. And in an average year, I think we averaged 35 or 36 minutes of instructional time, not just in math, but in all the disciplines. When you take that number and look at the content that needs to be addressed in 7 units of 6th grade math, it would require 233 days of school to cover that material. It would require nearly 220 days of school for the 7th grade curriculum and 236 days for an 8th grade math curriculum. Now that's just looking at the pacing for the 7 units that we teach, which doesn't include probability and statistics, which is a separate stride course at Middlebrook, and it also doesn't include the problem solving unit kind of at the end of each grade level. The current instructional time doesn't provide enough opportunities for small group instruction, and the math instructional time, what makes this really difficult is increasing math instructional time has to come from somewhere. And let's talk about that a little bit more. One of the things to look at is, could we make the school day longer? In reality, our district school day is 15 minutes shorter than most of our DIRT counterparts and most of the state of Connecticut. Middlebrook has a double reading and writing block. None of our other school districts in our DIRT do. Most districts in the state have one ELA block of time. If there's more than one, usually that happens in 6th grade in the transition from 5th to 6th grade. So these are difficult decisions and a difficult struggle, but it really is essential for math. And my colleague Jory provided me with an example that really resonates. It's like asking someone to drive to California and giving them 1 tank of gas to do it in. So I think this is one of the considerations, findings, and recommendations from the Math Curriculum Review Committee that we need to continue working on. You can go to the next slide. The other piece of that, and it's really important, time alone will not improve math achievement. Other measures are necessary. However, many of these measures to improve achievement can't really be implemented without more instructional time. We're going to spend a few minutes taking a look at what are some of those other components that go into improving math achievement. We talked about instructional model, and a model that is designed to address how children learn math. Our K-5 lesson framework is designed with that in mind, to address how students learn math. In grades 6 through 8, the embedded lesson structure in illustrative math provides the same attention to learning progressions. We need a curriculum that's aligned with the Common Core standards and promotes problem solving and independence. And the newly rewritten curriculum units, K-5, and the piloted IM units are designed to do just that, promote student independence and problem solving. The other piece of the instructional puzzle is the routine use of data to be responsive and to inform instruction that meets students' needs. The way we approach doing that here is teachers work together in their IETs, their instructional effectiveness teams, to meet and discuss, look at student work, and plan what students are ready to learn and how to address that learning. This is an emerging, developing practice for us, and we support the teachers in their work to do that with the use of the instructional coaches. Go ahead. Okay. Okay. So how do we get there? I think that's the next step. And the next series of slides are intended to focus in on the specific actions that we need to achieve that long-term growth and achievement. And again, this slide is kind of focused on medium to long-term because they come from the work of and the recommendations of the Math Curriculum Review Committee. First and foremost is finishing the alignment of the curriculum, providing the foundation for algebra. That work will be done or nearly done this next summer. Promoting and consistently utilizing the student-centered instructional model, and that lesson framework at the elementary level is what we're talking about, and the promotion of classroom practices that foster that independence in problem solving. We need to address the needs of struggling students better. Chuck talked about that, and we can utilize our interventionists and our AIM teachers to help support that work as well. And around instructional time, we protect instructional time at the elementary school and hopefully find a way to increase instructional time at the middle school. The recommendations of the committee were built on the assumption of growth for each student and the fact that we know that steady incremental growth does result in math achievement. More rapid results will require dedicating more resources to that effort, and kind of overlooking or not utilizing or not employing all the recommendations would certainly delay the progress going forward. We are going to rely on the support from the building administrators to provide constructive feedback and to affirm and validate the work of the teachers and the coaches. So what this diagram does is really try to link those long-term goals and recommendations with a series of short-term actions that we can implement now or over the next year. And we're going to talk about them generally, and then I want to highlight some specific things that we're doing at Cider Mill and Middlebrook in the near term to link to and build on and achieve those long-term outcomes that we're looking for. We continue to revise and align the curriculum, and it's the kind of coaches that will be doing this work going forward in this summer. And we will need to kind of take a decision about full implementation of the illustrative math curriculum at Middlebrook. And we'll begin the process of planning for the introduction of the new high school courses. The second area is instruction and students, and that really focuses on further developing the use of the IET structure to promote responsive teaching practices. And that involves looking at student work to provide the right practice, more instruction or more enrichment as needed. Targeting fluency in grades 2 through 5, incorporating the use of IAB's interim assessment blocks are specific practices that the state of Connecticut developed that align with the kinds of questions and scenarios that students will encounter on the Smarter Balance assessment. It's not divorced from the curriculum. It incorporates the curriculum and learning for each grade, but also gives students experience with the language of the test specifically. We're looking at how best to include that in the work at Middlebrook. It may be that that work could be undertaken in the AIM and intervention classes. And then we need to further kind of solidify our fidelity to the lesson framework. With respect to time, notwithstanding the struggles and the challenges of the pandemic, Middlebrook has established a dedicated time for math practice every week, and that will occur on Wednesday mornings. Students,
Mill, Trudy, right?
I'm sorry?
You got Cider Mill. You said Middlebrook.
Oh, sorry, you're right, it is Cider Mill. They are dedicating Wednesday mornings to math practice, where students will spend about 15 minutes keeping their IXL diagnostic data up to date, and 15 minutes in targeted math fluency practice. The coaches worked with the IETs to embed specific other practice opportunities within each lesson and weekly as needed. And the coach will work with the IETs to figure out, to continue to access and utilize the IAB practices within the relevant curriculum units. At Middlebrook, the coach will work with the IETs to continue to adapt the curriculum to the current schedule. And support the IETs in identifying the prerequisite skills and materials that support student learning. The challenge at Middlebrook is to create time for small group or targeted instructions, and we're looking to establish that on Wednesdays. And again, referring back to the IEB practice, probably we'll look at seeing how we can do that within the AIM and intervention classes. Another word, just to be clear about small group instruction, it's something that we rely on and promote, but in the current model with social distancing, small group instruction can be challenging. But there are teachers who are finding ways to do it. And I think here the role of the coaches will be instrumental in working with teachers to find ways to approximate small group instruction. And I think we're ready for the next slide.
Trudy, can I ask you a question about that slide real quick?
Sure.
Sorry, Chuck, can you go back 1 second? The part about considering fully adopting the illustrative math for 6 to 8, are we just adding in more units that involve that? Are we substituting are we switching out something else? Can you just explain that again?
Sure. The middle school, for their grade level classes and the compressed pre-algebra classes, have relied on Math in Focus. Math in Focus has been problematic because it wasn't well aligned with the Common Core standards, which is which has been problematic for our students for a while. We started supplementing materials a while ago, and in the course of time began looking into the illustrative math curriculum. What we've done is replaced units as we teach them with the illustrative math units to see, does it work? Does it work for students? Are teachers able and comfortable implementing the new curriculum? And that's kind of how we've done it. We're at the point now where we need to take a decision to be fully committed to it or not. And obviously that decision would have to be discussed at teaching and learning and ultimately the board. But we're not quite ready to make that decision final, but I think we're very much leaning in that direction.
Okay. And I guess feedback then from our teachers has been positive across the board?
Yes. It is
Okay.
more challenging, but it is when you mention the ability to really achieve that level of rigor and challenge for students, this does it.
Okay. Sorry, I forgot my video was off. Thanks.
Pretty, really quickly, I just had a question about, you mentioned it being challenging to have small groups. I just wanted you to explain that a little bit more clearly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reality of the pandemic. Normally, when teachers engage in small group instruction, they might call the kids over to a table, nice little donut-shaped table or horseshoe table in the corner of the room, and talk about the things that that group of students might be struggling with or might need more support in. Teachers might organize desks, tables, and chairs so the groups of 4 students, 2 are sitting next to each other, 2 are facing each other. And I'm taking a lot of time with the physical description because I'm seeing your head nod, and I think what you're realizing is that that arrangement of furniture is quite simply impossible in the
So I guess I was thinking overall, not
Yeah.
just COVID.
Yeah, our teachers are capable of engaging in small group instruction very well with our students. What they're struggling with right now is the reality of social distancing and barriers, all for good reasons and all necessary, but it does impede the usual way of doing things. There are ways that teachers have found to do it, probably not as frequently. And, some teachers rely on pairing kids in a breakout room in Zoom with kids in the classroom. That's great. Not all teachers have that level of comfort with the technology.
Okay. And then one more question. If you've gotten any feedback from teachers and students who have been in those co-taught algebra classes, is that more of a help? Is that something that could increase with the students? I mean, I just, any feedback that you've gotten from those co-taught classes?
Yeah, not feedback. I know Chuck has gone in and taken a look at the classes. I have as well. I've also gone into the minis, the mini component of those classes. Honestly, I think they're on the right track. They're doing the right things. It is an algebra curriculum. I think the hybrid model is a challenge for these kids, and that's not something that's unique to Wilton. I've heard it really across the board in other districts. Kids who are streaming in find it difficult, and I think it's particularly challenging for that group of students. So I don't know if the challenge really comes from the class and the curriculum as much as it comes from the circumstances. They're working through it. The kids in that, and the students in that class have a lot of gaps to make up.
Okay.
So if I could just, so we're talking about some short-term and some longer-term strategies.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I'm kind of hearing the most is that at the base of it, it's time. So I guess what I'm a little bit concerned about is we keep on talking about trying to figure out ways to give more time. And in that process, kids are still losing time. So, and right now, given all the barriers of pandemic schooling, I don't think that we kind of have the luxury of time.
Right, right.
So in that respect, I think it would be helpful if perhaps we maybe look at, or if you guys are also looking at kind of perhaps interim or, ways to provide, greater access or exposure that perhaps doesn't live in our long-term post, pandemic operation.
So Ruth, we haven't gotten to that point yet, but one of the things I want the board to consider is, particularly at Middlebrook, maybe we need to offer some supplementary instruction, either before or after school, at least for this year. Now that involves a lot of complexity. We need to figure out the money. We need to figure out who we're targeting, who's going to provide that instruction, how it will be provided. But it is, I think, one kind of stopgap measure that we should think about to resolve the time issue, at least temporarily, until we can come up with a more long-term solution. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And that's kind of what I was kind of circling around. Do we have some type of, short-term solutions to make sure that not only are we realizing and implementing our long-term goals, but making sure that we're not, further disadvantaging our students or ourselves in these current times?
Yeah, so in respect to the time issue, yes. I think it's also important to realize that time is necessary but not sufficient, right? So one of the things we also need to beef up is what we were calling responsive teaching, and making sure that teachers know where kids are and that they have the support they need to move kids from where they are to where they need to be. And that's really done within the context of an IET meeting.
So, but I do feel, although it's not a formal existence yet, but I feel like both Cider Mill and Middlebrook have, their math teachers do offer time. It's not every day, but it's still, once or twice a week. And so it's available, and they're doing that, I think, probably on their own as opposed to through their contracts or what have you. So I feel like adding more time at the beginning and end, unless you're forcing the kids to go, may not do it, because it's obviously voluntary for the kids to do this, but the availability is still there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of one of my concerns. If you have something offering it before and after school, and if the kids are choosing not to go, it's already there now and kids are not always using it.
Right. I don't disagree with you, Gretchen. The difference is I'm thinking of something a little bit more formal and targeted. Extra help. All of our teachers offer extra help. Not everybody takes advantage of it, but we do offer extra help. I'm not thinking of extra help on what the kids are having difficulty with right then and there. I'm thinking of using our assessment data to identify the strands and kind of those gap areas that can be addressed in a more formal way. I don't quite know how to resolve the issue of, I mean, we can't mandate it. We can't. But we can offer it, and we can encourage parents and support them in accessing it.
Chuck,
yeah.
One question I have, and I think extra help is awesome. Sometimes, so could we ever, who's paying for that? Is that part of the teacher's contract to offer the extra help?
Yes.
So could it ever be, I've been surprised in the past, and again, this is a denominator of one, I'll have my daughter go to extra help and the teacher's like, oh, I'm so happy she's coming into extra help. I'm like, well, I wish you would have reached out and said, could your daughter come to extra help? And then the teacher's like, well, it's kind of, we want them to decide that they need extra help. So I just think crossing that bridge, if even the teachers could say, you've been targeted because of testing, because of what we see in the class, could your child come to extra help? That I think would be huge. Just again, from denominator of one, my experience.
No, but your denominator is correct. And that's kind of what I was getting at. This would be a more formal process where we would look at assessment data and recommend specifically. I don't know that we would have the capacity to offer this to all students, but we could offer it to groups of students and also make sure that we're addressing the things that we know are impacting their performance.
Personally, I think that would be amazing. Even if the teacher says, who are your, bottom 4 students who could come in and offer that, I think that would be an amazing start.
So if the board, as a whole group, are interested in pursuing that, then I guess the next step would be for us to kind of flesh out a more detailed plan and present that to you.
But the only question I have, and I'm definitely interested in that, is you mentioned who would pay for that. Just circling back around to that, isn't that something that's already being offered and part of the teacher's contract? And we would just now identify specific students who could benefit?
Okay, so extra help is a little different than what I'm thinking. Extra help is something teachers need to be available. The practice here in Wilton has been that students need to show some initiative in accessing that. It's also pretty much focused on the immediate task that the kids are trying to resolve in the classroom. What I'm proposing is that we pay somebody extra to offer a formal course either before or after school, where we identify who those kids are, we make the recommendation to the family, and then we provide the teacher with the materials and the information they need to address some of the underlying gaps. So it's different. And we're gonna bump up against practice. With our collective bargaining unit, we have to be careful about changing the nature of the work. So I don't know if that helps.
Would that,
The only question that I would have is going back to Jen's question about our exceeding learners. I can't remember how you guys identified them. I think if we're going to pay for that for our bottom half, I also think we need to offer that for our top half, because again, denominator of 1, I personally spend I just calculated it, $242 a week on extra math outside of school help for my son who's exceeding and for my daughter who is faltering. So I think if we're going to offer that personally, I think we should also offer that. If we're going to spend X amount of dollars to help the bottom, we should also spend X amount of dollars to help the top.
Okay, so as I develop this more detailed plan, which I'm getting the sense you're interested in looking at, let me lay out all the potential options and what their implications are, both budgetarily and practically what we can offer. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, I think you're hearing that we're interested, but I've also, I think that's why I keep asking the question about, do we have the best schedule now just to get through the rest of the year? And I have often wondered, can we extend the math time, the reading time, and perhaps lessen? And this is, I don't want to get all the social studies people mad at me, or the science people mad at me, or the art people mad at me, or the PE people mad at me. But if we boil it down to the most essential, we don't want to spend a whole lot of time next year trying to make up for lost foundational skills. What can we do this year within our school day to highlight, the most foundational subjects, which I see as reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I realize, I think to me, it seems like the elementary school might have some flexibility there because one teacher offers multiple subjects. And I understand that you bump into some other issues when you hit the secondary level. But I'm just wondering if we have fully explored, the most we can do within the school day. That is not to say I'm opposed to supplemental instruction. I'm not. We want to see what that proposal is. But I'd also like to be reassured that we are not scared of altering our current schedule to get through this year without too much learning loss in the most foundational skills that kids need.
I absolutely agree with you, Debbie, and I'm not scared at all.
Okay, yeah, so I kind of echoed, that was Debbie's sentiments, and she put it more eloquently, I think, than I did. And just kind of looking at this year, if things need to be reorientated a bit. And if doing that, then also would provide greater time for the high flyers to be further challenged within that same time period. So I think that we're looking at an equitable distribution of opportunity. But I'm just concerned that that we need to look at this year and the remainder of this year as perhaps being a little bit different and not trying to necessarily fit all of our expectations and structure that happens in a non-pandemic year in this pandemic year.
Sure.
Hey, Ruth, one thing I'll say is that we had a discussion at the Teaching and Learning Committee that I'm sure we're going to talk about later, that Middlebrook is, as far as I know, going to try to move to a block schedule. And Debbie, I don't know if you've heard this as well, but going to move to a block schedule as a pilot between Thanksgiving and Christmas, which I think is awesome. I don't know where that is, but I didn't know if Debbie and Ruth had heard that.
Yeah,
And
so
our
again,
story
I'm trying to push it.
Yeah, no,
Push more
kudos,
time in
kudos.
math.
Yeah,
and
kudos,
reading
kudos.
it without, yeah. Okay,
I'm looking at the clock and I
I
believe
know, I am too.
an executive session. So you're bringing up a lot of complex issues, and I think we need more time to kind of dig into them. The schedule in and of
Sure,
itself is very complicated.
yeah,
and
right.
we could talk about it.
I also, if I just want to go back to that last point about the block schedule. The staff at Middlebrook has definitely mocked up a schedule, and they're deep in the throes of conversation around it. At this point, and Jory can confirm, I don't believe that there is a commitment to actually pilot that at this point. I know there's some interest, but they're really wading through evaluating the benefits and drawbacks of that. And so through the last survey among the staff members a week or so ago, the school administration got some very clear feedback about, potential detriments to making that change, even piloting it in the near term. So I think that is still under evaluation. It is not a commitment at this point. Is that correct, Jar?
Yes, that's correct. Definitely want to pilot it. It's not going to be this week.
I also think, again, we're getting into a level of complexity. The block schedule doesn't actually get us more time.
Right,
It does decrease the amount of transitions, and it will allow the teachers to maybe take a lesson and go a little bit deeper, but it's not actually getting us more time. So at this point, maybe we should pause and get back together so that we can finish the presentation and then engage in a more in-depth discussion around this. Would that be okay?
Yeah, no, that would be, I mean, from my perspective, that would be great. And I would also kind of, also given where we are in the school year, also kind of advance perhaps some ideas or some outlines of what could perhaps be some changes to facilitate some of the things we've talked about for maybe just the second half of this year.
Sure.
Kevin, how are we doing on time? I don't know what people's schedules are, given that it's noon. I'm not sure how many board members can stay on for much longer than 12:15. So I just want to sort of check in before we decide what to talk about next.
Yeah, we'll need about 15 minutes just to for the executive session, and that's a separate meeting link. So we'll just want to log into that one.
So Debbie, can we adjourn this, because some of us have to go pick up kids at 12:30, and then just get into the next session?
Okay. All right. So Kevin and Chuck, how do you want to handle the last session here? Do you want to pick it up at a later date, or send us the slides and let us ask questions?
Yeah. So slide deck, and then I think we have some good, clear, one or two clear next steps that we'll develop and bring back to you. But
okay,
a lot of information. So I would just ask that our board continue to kind of dig into it, and you can send questions to either Chuck or to me, and we'll make sure we look at them, and then we'll just do a wrap here to this question.
Okay. But before everybody runs off, I do want to thank all the staff. It's been a very comprehensive, thoughtful, clear, and very helpful presentation. So thank you so much. There's a lot of data here. So how about if we adjourn the workshop, and then we'll pick up in the next meeting for the board members only. All right, so thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, guys.